Hello and welcome. My name is Sean Glumace. I'm an Adobe Education Leader, and today in this video we're going to go through how to create a simple comic book cover using really just layer effects and some of the basic filters in Photoshop. Now if you have an older version of Photoshop, I'm going to be using 2019 here. Almost everything is the same. There's a few little things in the layer effects with strokes that they've added some neat features, but we'll go over that as we get there. But really this video is aimed at the classroom, but anyone can use this, and it's really aimed at almost an entry-level Photoshop user. So we're not going to be doing a lot of complex masking or anything else that takes a lot of skill set, but it's taking these simple layer effects and filters and putting them together. To speed things up, I've already masked out the character that we have here, who's actually my daughter. It was a Halloween costume, but I've already knocked her out, and I did it pretty quick and dirty. And I also have a template for you. So this is the final product that we're looking at. And as you can see over here, we have our layers. We'll get into that in a few seconds. But I do want to set up my desktop, and I suggest that you do the same. So if you have Photoshop open, even if you don't have a file open yet, we want to do our window workspace. And we're going to be doing graphic and web. If you already have it selected, you can also hit reset graphic and web. And this will give you the same layout that I have. If you have another layout that you're more comfortable with, that's great. We're really only going to be using the character palette, a styles palette, and our layers palette here to build this out. So if you downloaded the files, there are 3 files in there. The first one is a 300 DPI. Whoops, it's a little misspelled there, but we'll fix that. And this is a standard comic book template in Photoshop. So roughly, we're looking at 6.75 inches by 10.25 inches. That's the US standard for comic books, give or take a fraction of an inch here or there. And we're going to stick to that for this project. So this PSD file is all layered out. And if you look over here under layers, I have my template notes in here. And then we have our live area, our trim, and our bleed. And I'm not going to go through why we call all these things this. That's kind of another video. But if you look at these guidelines that we've put in, any artwork that's in the red will get trimmed off. Any that's in the green, you want to make sure you don't put anything real important in there. Really what we're looking at is this purple area. And you'll see that if we go back to this layout here, I've kept all of my text. I've kept everything important within there. So this is the file we're going to work with. To make it real easy, make sure you have it open. You can turn off the little eyeball here over in the layers palette, and we'll get a nice blank canvas. So we don't have to create anything for this. I've given you the template. The other file that I'm going to have open is redjester.psd. This is our character and the red jester. And if you notice, I've already knocked her out pretty quickly. This was a very quick and dirty job. I just used the basic masking tools, went through, knocked it out, deleted it, put it on a transparent background, even though I have a white one there. And we'll be using this image. And if we take a really close look at this, and like I said, this video isn't about knocking out and cropping and everything. So I did a pretty quick and dirty job on this, but that's fine. Actually, it'll add to the look and feel of what we're shooting for here. So we have our 2 things that we need to start working. We have our PSD file, which is our layout, and then we have our PSD for our red jester. And I'm going to keep this open just to refer back. And this was my test layout. This is what I sat down and worked with to kind of get my ideas and what I wanted to do with this video. So we may end up with something that looks a little bit different, but this file is always here for you. It's all layered out. I've used Impact here as the font. I think I use Arial for the others. So these are fonts that are available to everyone. You can use other fonts. There's some great comic book fonts from Blambot. And if you do a Google search, you'll find them. Just don't use Comic Sans. And there's an entire history behind that. And it really is not a comic book font. You can read up on it online, do a Google search. So Impact is the font that I'm going to be using. and that will make it easy for you. But you can always choose and change any of this up. So I do encourage you to be creative. What I found with my students and when I teach workshops, it's sometimes easier to follow along with me and do exactly as I do in my videos and my layouts. But if you like something else, or you want to change the colors, or you want to use your own photos, please be creative. That's what this is about. And we kept this pretty simple, so you can drag and drop other things into this and try to make it your own. All right, so let's take a look. I am going to make one slight change to my layout here. I prefer a much larger layers palette, so I'm going to move it up here so you can see the whole thing. I have my character palette open as well. We're going to use that for the type. We have all of our other tools available to us, and we won't be using that many of them either. So like I said, if you're an instructor and you're using this in class for, let's say, elementary or middle school, this is a great project. There's a lot of freedom here, and they end up with a really nice product. But even if you're a high school, college, university, or doing this on your own, it's still a great project. And a lot of things that we'll do here, I do every day. When I lay out, let's say, a postcard or a poster or even a business card, I do a lot of that work in Photoshop now instead of Illustrator. And all these little things and tips and tricks I'm going to go over can be applied to that as well. So let's get started. I have my comic book template. I've turned off the template notes. So I put them all in a folder here in the layers so you can click on it and get rid of it. And so let's start just with our basic layout. And I'm going to jump back and forth here just because I like to talk about things before we do them, but I want to get the basics done. Not her in the front, not my type, but we have a bar up here, we have a bar down here, which is really the same bar. Then we have the circles in the background, and we have a background color as well. So we're looking at 3 different layers for the background, and then a layer for the top bar and the bottom bar. So those are the basic elements that we need to bring in. So I'm going to come over. And let's start at the very back. So I like working backwards, forwards. So we're going to have to do a background object, then we're going to do a circle, and then we'll duplicate it, and then we'll draw out our 2 rectangles. So our first one, I'm going to grab my rectangle tool. And if you float over the tools, you'll see you get these nice little pop-ups now in Photoshop. That U, so you see rectangle and U, that is the key command for it. So if you hit your keyboard, I'm not going to go through too many of those, but I'll call them out when I think about it. And I'm going to draw a rectangle that fills this entire layout. And if you notice, I need to see our background here and really beyond the trim, because I like to draw objects beyond. I will never just start right here on the edge. I like to come out and I'm going to draw a rectangle that fills this area. And you'll notice we get a fill up at the top. We get our fill, which is red. We can put a stroke, which we don't need on it. Over here under properties, tells us everything about it. But if I go back to layers, I'll click on layers here, and I've got my rectangle. So I'm going to double click on rectangle and call it background. I like to be organized, so name your layers and name your objects as you're going. It's just a good habit to get into. Now we do have 2 backgrounds, but we know this one is just the white. So we have the red. Next thing I'm going to do is grab my ellipse tool or my circle tool. And if we take a look here, one of the things I was trying to do is just add kind of a graphic that flows through and points to our main character on the cover. And that's going to be built using 2 circles. So sometimes you would think, oh, I'll take my pen tool or maybe and draw this object. There's no reason to do that. We can use basic objects to get these other shapes laid out, and they're much easier to work with too when they're larger objects. So I have my ellipse tool. Now the problem is it's got a fill of red right now. If we look up here, the shape fill red. I'm going to change that to white. Whoops. And did you notice what happened? I still had background selected. So what ended up happening here, and I'm glad I messed up. I'll do that through these videos. Just to explain what happened, I had my background object selected, and when I went in up at the top, it was still selected. I selected red, it changed it. So to make sure that doesn't happen, you do need to deselect, and you can do that using the Move tool. Click anywhere, and it's also select, deselect layers, and deselect. I'll do it just by clicking usually out here. Now I'll grab my Ellipse tool, and if I do the fill, you'll notice it didn't change because I did not have my layer selected. So important note, when you have something selected, we have this object, layer object selected. You start changing things, it's going to change that. So now, got my circle, and even if I had drawn a red circle, I can go in and change it. And I'm going to draw a circle here. You'll notice I get an ellipse, but if you hold down the Shift key on your keyboard, you get a nice perfect circle. So I'm going to draw a big circle here. If I go back to my layers, I have the Ellipse tool. Sorry, not the Ellipse tool, but the ellipse layer. And I'm going to call it Circle 1. Now if I grab my Move tool, I can move it. You can see here, looks pretty good. I can always grab one of the edges, and if your transform control tools are not on, this binding or bounding box that's around it, up at the top when you have a layer selected or an object, you can, and the Move tool, you can turn on Show Transform Controls. If you don't, you're not going to get those transform controls. I prefer them on because I use them all the time, because now I can grab a corner, hold down the Shift key, and rescale it. And I'm pretty happy with that. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you can see now these two objects break it up. I get a much more interesting background. You can see, maybe I need to move in a little bit more, but in the end, we're going to end up with something that might be a little different than my original there. All right, so we have two objects in here. I'm going to go back to my background, and we want to start working on adding effects and layer effects to this. So I'm going to go in and hit my layer effects at the bottom, so I have my background selected, and we are going to do a pattern overlay with this, and we're going to use this a lot today. So you can see it changed it to this pattern, and we get our layer styles. So we're going to do a lot of work in this window. I'm going to change the pattern to this dot pattern, and you should have this selected or this installed. If not, you can always try a different one, but really we're looking for the dots. These are kind of the defaults that are here. So I'm going to select dots, and I'll change the scale of the dots. There we go. So in old comic book printing, old comic strip printing, we use the process, a 4-color process that uses dots. So those cyan, magenta, yellow, K is black, but it also stands for key, but black. Those 4 colors are mixed together with dots that overlay in your brain, puts them together, and we see different colors. So from those 4 colors, C, M, Y, and K, and black, I mean, we can, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, we can mix these together. So it's actually a look that from a pop culture standpoint, everyone sees this dot pattern and they think comics. And so we're going to use this here, and it's built in. I actually like the effect as well. So we can change the opacity. Now this is a real simple way. And I'm going to go down to maybe about 20%. Now it's not as red, but I meant to do that on purpose. We could change the scale of these. You can see they're a little too big there, a little too small. So somewhere in the 200 range is probably fine. But just playing with the opacity, the pattern, and the scale, we get this nice pattern in the background. And we're going to use this over and over again today. So that's the only thing I think we're going to do for the background. Hit OK. And let's say this red's a little too bright. I can always double click on the background. This will open up my color picker, and I can just adjust on this red, maybe go a little darker. That's up to you. All right, so we have our background set. Now for our circle, if we take a look, there's a lot going on in that circle. Most importantly, we have some strokes on it. And I use a lot of strokes, as you can see throughout my layout when I build. And we are going to come down the little FX at the bottom. So have circle 1 selected, FX, and we are going to do stroke. So our first stroke, the color is white. So we have 2 strokes, and which is really nice. This is something new to the newer Photoshop. So if you have an old version of Photoshop, you probably only have this 1 stroke. That's fine, just use that. But if you have both, we're going to use them. I'm going to change this to black. You can see it's fairly small, but I can change the size here. Now, mind you, these numbers, if you're close, you're close. If it's a little different, that's fine. I'm not too worried about it. So I'm going to do black. You can do inside or outside. So I'm going to do this one outside. And that looks good. So I'll hit OK. Now you'll see, well, we did red and black, but we can change those up. We've got a pattern and a gradient in here. So before I do my second stroke, I'm going to put in the gradient and pattern. So once again, if I go down to my FX, let's do our pattern overlay first. And it pulled up the same one, so it remembered. I'm going to change the scale though. Go a little tighter. Maybe 225. And I'll bring the opacity up some too, to about 30. Once again, this is about you experimenting and playing. Now, I'm going to place a gradient overlay on this. So we could put a solid color if we wanted to, but it doesn't help as much, does it? So if I place a gradient overlay, we have a blend mode, we have our opacity, we have our gradient. Under the gradient, I'm going to click on it. And we're going to pick one out of the box here. That one's kind of cool. And I'm going to bring the opacity down. So I selected that, brought it down. That looks good. Let's try a different one. I think I used, this is the one I used. So I'm going to pick it, one of the, looks like a rainbow. I don't know, I like the yellow. We'll use the rainbow. How's that? We'll hit OK. We'll go bring the opacity up a little. And then if we want to change the angle, you can change the angle of the gradient overlay. I like that. So you can see we're mixing together these layer styles. Now our other stroke, I'm going to turn it on. You can see the strokes on the outside. So let's put it on the inside. I think I'm going to put white for this one. So let's see. We did red and black. So I think I'm going to stick to the red and black. So that means we got to fix it. But it's up to you. You can always reopen any of the layer effects. So if you open up your layer over next to the FX here, you can double click on these. I'll do black, and the other will do red instead of white. There we go. Once again, your call. However you want to do it. And I'm going to put a drop shadow on this. I like depth. When I'm working with objects, you'll see here, I have a lot of small drop shadows. I try to add depth to this entire layout. And we'll do that with a drop shadow. So having my circle selected, I can go down and do drop shadow. Now you'll notice nothing happens because the angle of the drop shadow is coming, the light source is here and it's going across and it's placing the drop shadow there. So if we change the light source, make it a little bit bigger, you can see the drop shadow right here. It's a fairly large one, but it works. There's the spread. And we can change the angle some. You can see playing with it. Sometimes you gotta go fairly far out because of those strokes. There we go. I'm just making the stroke on the red a little bit bigger as well. That looks good. So now we're going to do another circle. And to do that, and to make our life much easier, I'm going to select our circle 1. And in the pull-down menu, you could duplicate the layer. Sorry. So we will duplicate layer. So we'll call this circle 2. And I'm going to drag this in. And I'm going to offset this and maybe stretch it a little. That way it doesn't look like it's just 2 circles. There we go. Double click. And for this one, we'll do white, black, and then a red gradient in the background. So we can now go into our strokes. So we'll start on that outside one, make it white. I'm going to change the size a little, just to give myself a little bit of... So I double clicked, came in on stroke, changed the black one to white. Clicked on the next one. This one will become black. I'll make this a little smaller as well. Doesn't need to be as big. And then the gradient overlay, I'm going to go to a black to white for now. And actually, let's turn it off for now. I'm going to turn that off and I'm going to leave the pattern overlay, but let's make it a little bit bigger too, just so we have different layers going on. I'm going to adjust this. I'm using the move tool. You can see it goes black to red. So let's go back into the gradient overlay. And we're going to create a gradient right now. So I'm going to click on gradients. And I'm going to change the stops on the gradient. So the first one is the opacity stop. And you can see the color stop. So I'm going to change the color stop to a dark red. And the other to black. And I'm going to bring the opacity up. If you have trouble with the gradient, you can always do just a color overlay and put in a dark color. Like that. And then change the opacity. Oops, we got to turn off the gradient overlay. There you go. So if you're having issues with that, it's an easy fix. But I'm going to stick with the gradient overlay here. All right. Let's take a look at what we got. It was a little bit brighter back there, isn't it? A little dark on this one. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the gradient overlay. And I'm just going to put that color overlay in here. And go dark with it. There we go. Hit OK. And that looks pretty good. I'm happy with this. We can always change this gradient here a little bit later on. I might even change it now. And let's try a different one. I'm going to go with the orange and the yellow. I don't know why, but that's just working for me right now. Yeah, let's go with that. And I do a lot of this, just kind of playing. And the reason I show this instead of just walking through and go do this, 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 and this, because in all reality, this is what you're going to need to do every day. You can even change the scale some. And I like how that looks. Alright, so we have our background done. Hit OK. Let's take a look now. We need a bar at the top, bar at the bottom. So we're going to do the same one twice. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool, make sure I'm above my circles, and I'll close these up. And I'm going to draw a bar, and I'll start out here because I don't want the edges showing. And there we go. So we have our top bar. So let's put some layer effects on this. So we'll do a stroke. And it is black, so it doesn't need to be that big. Let's do about 15 or so on this. Actually, I'll leave it at that. Then let's do a drop shadow. Now the angle, remember, we changed the angle, so we're going to change this, but look what happened. Use global light was on. If I undo that, actually I'll hit cancel. See how everything jumped? So this is real important. Put the stroke back on, sorry about that. When we change the drop shadow and we want to change this angle, I need to turn off use global light. I set the global light for all of these, so now I'm going to have to adjust it. 120 is where I want to be. Change the size, and you'll see it's not that big of a drop shadow. Stroke needs to be a little bit bigger. This is where you'll notice changes. You'll know when you need to change something. So now we're not going to put a pattern in here, but I do want to put a gradient in here. So I'm going to turn on the gradient, and I'm going to go black to white. And this time though, instead of going black to white, I'm going to change the color stop on the white to kind of a very dark black. Like right in there. You'll notice my opacity, it's not looking very good. That's because I need to fix the opacity. There we go. Oh, so my strokes weren't correct. I knew something wasn't right. So I got my fill right, but I need to do white and red. So we go in, double click on the stroke. Let's do white. Make this a little smaller, maybe about 3 or 4, and then add the red. Whoops. Did anyone see the mistake I made there? I wasn't on the correct stroke. There we go. Let me make the white a little bit bigger. There we go. And that adds some depth. I'm going to zoom in here just to show you what's going on. So you can see I now have a little bit of a gradient in here, which is nice. Then we've got a red stroke on the inside, a white on the outside, and a drop shadow. You can see the depth coming all the way through here now. It's like things are layered and they're throwing shadows on each other. My only change I'm going to make here is with the gradient. I'm going to double click on it. And I'm going to change the angle to 90 degrees. So it goes from the reddish dark to black. Or maybe we'll do -90. Yeah, that's better. -90. Once again, this is about you playing. Maybe the stroke needs to be just a slight bigger and maybe on the outside. Nope, let's stick to the inside. So it's playing with all of this, and there's all kinds of other layer effects I'm not getting into here. We're keeping this simple, but always check it out. So here's our layout. We're going to take this one, and guess what? We're going to duplicate the layer. Bring that down. I'm going to snap it pretty much right to the guideline. And this is bottom bar. All right, so now we're kind of in the home stretch here. Let's bring her in. So I have the redjester.psd file up and open here. I've already knocked her out of the background. So all you need to do is, with the move tool, click, hold, and drag it over to your layout. You can also copy and paste, but I'm going to position her about right there. You can kind of see her hands, and we'll play with this a little bit more. But for right now, there she is. So we'll call her Red Jester. Whoops, double click on the name. Now a few things. The bottom bar we need on top of her. So if I grab the top bar and drag it and drop it above, whoops, not top bar, undo, Control Z or Command Z, bottom bar needs to be on top. All right, so now let's start working on her. We're not going to do very much, actually. First thing we're going to do is we're going to duplicate it. I want to keep an original behind. We're going to have two layers to make this effect, this kind of comic book effect. So I'm going to duplicate the layer, and we'll call it Red Jester 2. And we're going to go up under Filter. And there's a really cool tool here called Filter Gallery. If you don't have it, you're going to go to Pixelate and go to Color Halftone. But if you go to Filter Gallery, you're going to get all these different filters. Sketch. And the one we're going to use is actually halftone pattern. So there's some cool things you could do in here. And you can see when we apply the halftone pattern here, there's just tons of stuff. I mean, you can even try graphic pen, but we're going to go with the halftone pattern. And I'm going to go the size on this to about 2. Contrast, we're going to go a little high on this and go about 10. So you can see what it does. It gives it that halftone pattern. If you don't have this window, like I said, it's under Filter, Halftone Pattern. But I like this because it gives you a preview. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to hit OK. And you can see it makes a nice red halftone pattern. Why is it red? Because look what we have over here. That was the color we had selected. So I'm going to undo this, Command Z. It'll take me back. Or you can do Edit, Undo. And I need to have black for the halftone. So I'm going to click on Set Foreground Color and go to black. That'll give me a black halftone pattern. So I do want to show you, though, if you don't have that filter gallery, and we may want to use it this way too, go to pixelate, color halftone. So what this does under the filter gallery, so you can see what just happened, gave me that black and white halftone, kind of like newspaper halftone. But let's do this one and go filter, pixelate, color halftone. And we're going to go up to, actually we're going to go down to, we'll stay at 8 and hit OK. And look what we ended up with. And this is really what we're looking for. And I just zoomed in on that just to kind of give you an idea. So we can go either way. I'm actually going to go the filter, pixelate, color halftone. You could try other ones here too. It's completely up to you. But if you notice, the key here is I duplicated the layer. And we're going to keep this really simple. I'm going to select the red gesture to, the one I've applied the filter to. And we could use smart filters as well. I'm just trying to keep this simple. And under the opacity, I'm going to bring the opacity down to about 15%. And if you take a look now, look at the effect we get. It's simple, but works really well for this. You can see her arms. Looks good, doesn't it? And it really is just a quick opacity change. See, too high doesn't look good. But right around 15%. See how it's working with the background now? And that's it. So let's put a stroke around her. You can see I added a double stroke and a drop shadow to her. We're not going to apply those to the first red gesture. We're going to apply it to the original. So I'm going to select it. I'm going to do the FX. I'm going to do stroke. And on this one, it's going to be outside. So stroke, outside. And let's do this about 13, 14, somewhere in that range, 15. And let's add the other stroke. And we're going to do this one outside as well. But this one's going to be black. And you can see we now have a nice outline on her. This is where I said it wasn't that great of a cutout job, but it works. It kind of gives you that rough edge to it. Go a little bit bigger here. There we go. And we're going to do a drop shadow. This one, though, is going to have to be really the global light. Remember the 20% going this way? And let's add the distance. And make the size a little bit more. What do you think about right there? And that looks good. Hit OK. Now, if I try to move this, look what happens. So we want to do something here. I'm going to hold down my Shift key and select both of the layers. So I hold the Shift key down, select both. And under your pull-down menu, we have link layers. This will now link the two of them. And I can move them in tandem. Because we're going to have to move this around a little bit. We may even blow it up just slightly. I don't like to do that because you never want to blow up an image past its original size. But this looks good. So let's get the type in. So the first thing is up at the top. We're going to work our way down. And once we have one of these done, these other ones are pretty quick. And you can see, I think I blew her up a little bit compared to this one. So it can happen. So we're going to use impact. And impact you can find if you select your type tool. You got impact here, regular. Just keep it simple. Any font will work. Any slab serif font or just slab font, anything heavy is probably going to work fine. So we got to do the first part, which is the world's greatest heroes. And I'm going to click anywhere here. Just make sure you're up at the very top here. We want all our type to be up here. So we'll type out the all caps too. All right, world's greatest heroes. I like to use the move tool. Remember, if you're not above, you'll probably end up below, so you got to make sure that you're in the right order over here. And that looks pretty good. So I'll hold down the, I'll change the size a little bit. I like to use the, gotta have a little bit of room on both sides. So I can use my arrow keys. And remember, we have the alignment tools right in the middle there. You set purple line, and up and down, it will align right to the middle. Yeah, it looks good. You know, this could be maybe a little bit bigger. This is where that, just that visual design comes in. I'm not going to tell you it has to be exactly this size, this size. This is something you just need to play with. Okay, over on the left and right, we have our issue number and our price. So this one's pretty simple. We'll take our pen, our type tool, and this time we'll do Arial. So up here at the top, or over here under character, you can type in Arial. I think we'll use Arial bold. There we go, Arial bold, and I'm going to do white. So before I start typing, I'm going to pick white. You can do that right here. And I don't know what number this is, so let's call it number 355, because we've been around a while, right? It's a little big, so I can change the size, and I may have to zoom in on this, so sorry, just to get it to fit the way I want to. I'll resize it. That looks good. See the alignment there? And I'm going to go right up to the edge. I'll zoom out a little. And then I can duplicate this layer. I'm going to right click and duplicate layer. You can use the pull down menu. So if you don't want to right click, you can use pull down, duplicate layer. And I'll just hit OK for now. I'll move it over. See how it snaps? I really like that. And this one, I don't know, our price is $2.99. So I'll have to do a little bit of adjustment here. There we go. So we got our number and our price. So let's do our header. So we're going to go back and do impact again. And if we look here, I'll just stick with white. I'll click once. The title of our book is Amazings. It's not the Avengers. So I'm going to scale this up. I'm going to get it to fit for the moment, right across. And we're going to go back to our layer effects. And just to look at this real quick as a cheat sheet, we have black, red, and the pattern. So we're going to do stroke. This one is black. We'll go a little bit bigger here. There we go. If you notice, I just filled in. There's no little gaps here. This one is red. Ah, we got these reversed. So this one needs to be red. Sorry, first one's red. Yeah, there we go. And the second one is black. So we gotta just change the size of the stroke, bring it down. And this will be the black. We'll bring it down some. There we go. Now we'll do a color, or sorry, our pattern overlay. And it remembered our pattern. We'll make this a little bit smaller than we had it. There we go. And in this case, I think we're good. Oh, drop shadow. In this case, turn off the global light. 120 is good. I'll change the distance and the size down a little. You can see it's not that visible, but it works. Now, one thing I am going to change here, I'm going to select the Amazings, and I'm going to change the color of the font to just a little bit of yellow. There we go. The white was too much. We'll hit OK. And that looks good. I may have to just scale it down slightly. I'm trying to get it to fit within my guidelines here. We'll move her down a little. That's looking good. So let's finish this up. There's some spacing issues here. I'm not that happy. So if I select and use my arrow keys, I can tighten that up. Just a little bit more right there. And we want to make sure Amazings is above her so her head kind of gets cut off there. So our last two is at the bottom. We got Introducing Red Jester. So you can see a little bit of difference between our two here. So Introducing Red Jester. So I'm going to select Amazings, and I'm going to duplicate the layer. Drag it down. And we're going to do Red Jester. So I'll select my type tool. We'll scale this down. Doesn't have to be the full. And we're going to reverse out. I'm going to do kind of a lighter red in there. So we'll go to the stroke. And let's make the outside stroke just a little bit bigger too. Just a little different than the header. And our last part is introducing. Oh, and if you notice, there is a gradient layer in there. So I'm going to throw that in a gradient effect. So gradient overlay. Ooh. I think that's all a little too much, huh? Like that. I'll bring the opacity down on it. So it gives it a little bit different look. Maybe even make the stroke white. Nah, that doesn't look right. We'll leave it. Alright, so we have that. Hit OK. One thing we're going to do here is I'll take my type tool and select it. I want to give it a little bit of a curve. So once you select it, up at the top we have our type tool. We have our create warp text. I'm going to select arc and bring it way down to maybe only about 5%. We can also try arch. Let's do the arch. We'll do it around plus 8%. Looks good. You can make it a little bit bigger. Oops. I'm going to move up my bar behind it. I can always click on it, move it. There we go. That's on center now. And I can move both of these. If you hold down the Shift key and select both layers, they become one unit for the moment. And that looks real good. So now I'm going to take Red Jester and duplicate it. Pull it up. And we need to do introducing. We'll scale this down. And we got to make a few changes. The stroke's just way too big on this, so let's bring it way down. And even the red needs to come down just a little bit. Maybe we'll do white in here. Ooh, no, that ain't gonna work. We'll leave it as is. But it already has our arch on it, so I don't have to change anything. And we'll get it close, but not right on top of it. And I think we are done. Now there's a lot of other things we could do with this. One thing I didn't do at the beginning was save as. And we'll call this, we'll call it Final Layout 2, just so we have it. Make sure you save your stuff. I wasn't saving, I was being bad. Make sure you save. I could blow her up just a little bit, but remember, image quality is going to suffer some if I do that. And I don't think I'm going to do that here. I'm pretty happy. But just placement too, I can't go any farther because our arm's cut off, so I'm a little bit restricted on. See, that doesn't work. I think having it just break a little bit works. And I'm just looking here. So the other thing we could do, I didn't get into them, but it's always neat to play with at the very end here. I'm going to close these up, is you can go in and add in, and I'll put it right below her. You can always add in some like a black and white layer. You can see, you can change it to black and white quickly. So we have black and white. We can go in and play with it if you want to do that. But we have a finished, oh, there we go. Now we have finished. I don't know if you saw a little white there. We have our finished comic book layout. So hopefully you can use this in your classroom or work along with this and play with it. You notice I didn't use a lot of tools that were complex. It was just really playing with the layer effects, some of the basic color and shape tools. And I think the one thing I want to emphasize here more than anything else is play. Try different colors. It's the way I teach, it's the way I work. I think it's important that you make mistakes like I did today. And sometimes the mistakes are awesome and they turn into something that works out better for you. You know, I can play with these colors more now. I can always go in and change them, but I have my basic layout and I can play with it and build it out from here. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully you learned something, and I'll see you next time.